Hello, this is Brett from SurvivalComms.
On the workbench today, we have two Motorola DTR550 portable radios. One thing to consider when you're looking at devices like this is that these radios are meant to be job site radios or task-focused radios. They're not hobbyist radios. These radios are meant to facilitate communication amongst a large group of people in a job site or in an industrial complex. These radios are license-free radios. They use the 902 to 928 megahertz ISM band, commingled with the amateur radio 33 centimeter spectrum, and is frequency spectrum set aside for low-power wireless devices such as this. And the devices are typically limited to 1 watt of RF power, and these radios, like many of the 900 megahertz ISM band radios, use frequency hopping spread spectrum technology. The first question many of you are going to have is, what the heck is frequency hopping spread spectrum? And say that fast 10 times. By definition, frequency hopping again, say that 10 times fast. Frequency hopping spread spectrum is a transmission scheme where instead of just using a single RF frequency or pair for sending and receiving information, you're using the entire spectrum within a certain frequency range, which in this example here between 902 and 928, and there's 50 RF channels in this example here. So instead of just using one, whenever the radio transmits to send the information, it moves all over the place in a pseudo-random sequence known as a hopping pattern. And the hopping pattern is something that's known to both the transmitter and the receiver to enable them to follow each other around in a certain sequence. It's important to remember that these frequency hops are taking place during the middle of a single transmission. This is a very good interference reduction system because even if there are collisions or interference between a couple of channels, it only happens in a fraction of a second, so it's not apparent to the end user. It's also not bad as a spectrum management technique. And what I mean by spectrum management is you have a resource, which is your RF spectrum here, and you have a certain amount of users, and you're trying to squeeze all of those users into that spectrum that's available to you. This is a good scheme for that. However, this is the reason why the devices are low powered, because the frequency hopping spread spectrum does require a certain amount of bandwidth in order to make it effective, and that can exclude other licensed users from the spectrum in question. A desirable side effect of this pseudo-random frequency hopping during transmission is that it is relatively efficient at securing circuits from inadvertent reception or from eavesdropping. We're going to step over to the spectrum analyzer and do a demonstration, and then we'll show how a radio receiver tuned to these frequencies basically doesn't pick up any transmission at all. Now, this is a demonstration of how the frequency hopping spread spectrum works. This is a program called Spectrum, and it's a free program and allows you to use a $25 SDR as a very rudimentary spectrum analyzer. We'll go ahead and make a transmission with a simple UHF radio so you can see what a conventional FM transmission looks like on here. And you can see our transmission right here. Into transmission, starting transmission again. So you see there's just one little individual spike there at 446.200 megahertz. We set our spectrum analyzer from 902 to 928 megahertz. And we'll watch the frequency hopping action during the transmission. And you can see these pips popping up randomly all over the spectrum, and this represents it hopping frequencies. And while it's evident to us that something's going on while we're using a spectrum analyzer, when we walk over to our scanner, you'll see that it gives no indication whatsoever anything's going on. You can see the form factor of the device here in my hand. The device weighs 8 ounces with a battery pack. It's very much like an IDEN handset, which is your legacy Nextel devices, considering they're pretty much parallel product lines. That's not surprising. You do have an accessory port here where you can plug in a microphone and speaker. Your battery doors on the back. The battery door unlocks as such, and you can remove the door and remove the battery pack. The battery is a 3.7 volt battery. Battery life is rated to be 20 hours per the user manual. I found the battery life to be excellent. I don't think it's 20 hours. However, it'll certainly last one operational period. Antenna is removable. It's a male SMA connector, and this is just a standard Motorola 800 megahertz antenna, quarter wave, like you used to use on the public safety microphones. And you could use one of the super stubby ones if you chose to, or you could use the half a wave one. It's really up to you. Here are your buttons: power on and off, home button, menu button, up and down selection arrows, select button on this side, and then this one here is a back button typically. At the base of your device you have your contacts for your drop-in charger, and also you have this accessory plug which you can plug a charger into, and this also is where you access the programming interface and the universal connector at the base of the device. Volume controls on the left hand side. Volume's quite loud, and this is your push to talk. Before we go too far down the rabbit hole with these devices, there's a few terms we need to discuss first. The first is ID. Each one of these devices has a unique ID. Essentially, this is a digital device, and like all digital devices, it uses networking protocols to communicate with the network, and those of you familiar with that will certainly understand, and there's nothing different in regards to that. Groups. This device has two different types of groups. One is a public group, which is open to all IDs, and then a private group, which is only open to select IDs. The device itself, as a default, has 5 public groups, and on a public group, that means that anybody that has one of these DTR550s, as long as they don't change that default data, can communicate with another one of these DTR550s without having to play with the keypads or do any kind of programming. In the private group, what you're doing is you're basically building a group, but you're only opening that group up to certain select IDs, meaning that it's going to pass traffic to all those devices that have the IDs in the list, and to any other device, they're not gonna hear it at all. The next is a private call, and that's essentially where you place a call request to another device, select that other device's ID from a list, hit send to that device, and their device beeps, and then you guys can carry on a conversation until you clear the private call. So that call only takes place between those two devices and not over the public or private group. The final term we're going to discuss is channel. Channel, in terms of these devices, is a hop set selection, or essentially the pseudo-random sequence that you're going to select for both the transmitting device and the receiving device. So that way they're both synchronized, and when one device hops frequencies, the other one hops correspondingly to allow you to carry out communication. Now that we've discussed some of the terms about how this works, we can discuss the display a little more intelligently. At the top, here's our ID. Now, with the programming software, or with the little keyboard that would plug into the bottom of it and the accessory connector, you can actually edit the alphanumeric display to reflect a more friendly tactical ID, such as like Unit 1, Unit 2, etc. for this, as well as for the talk group name. You can see that we're in public group 1, that this device has 5 groups in it at this time. You have your contact list, you have your menu, and you have your messages. This device will send brief text messages to one another, and outside of the default messages in the device, you do need the programming software or that keyboard to do it. The programming software is a free download from Motorola. The programming cable is about $40. Like I said, I'm waiting for my programming cable. Now, if we use our up and down arrows, we can change public groups here. You can see we're going through our different public groups. Now you can hit your menu, and you can see your recent calls, your device settings, your info for your device. Go to your contacts list. You can see I've got private group 1 in here already, public group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and back. there is a programming menu you can get into. You hold down the home button, you hit the push to talk 3 times, hit the right key, the down arrow, the left key, home button again, then 1, 2, 3. And now you're in a programming menu. And this allows you to edit some of your contacts as required. Set your hop set, like if you wanted to, for public 3. You can see here, and it's using, you want to edit. You can see you can change your channel right here. Change, and you can select one of your channels, which changes your hop set. And as a default, they're basically the 5 distinct public groups, and they're all on channel 1 hop set. Back, and back again, and exit. And it resets the device and saves the information. I've had a pair of these for about a week now, and I'm very impressed with the performance of them. What's really nice about it is when you go to make a transmission and there's no acknowledgement from any of the other radios in the group, it just tells you that no one's receiving your traffic, which is good because it saves you the time of wasting time going, hey, can you hear me? So that's pretty useful. Range-wise, they're comparable to like a UHF portable radio. They're a little less range than a 5-watt UHF portable, but not much. I mean, you're still getting about a good 1 mile range out of it. Price point on these is pretty much all over the place. It's like any other surplus radio equipment. These 2 that I purchased here, I bought both of them for $140 shipped to me, and they came with all brand new accessories, including the chargers. As far as it's being secure, it's secure against most hobby level listeners or monitors. Of course, someone who's resourceful enough to actually purchase one of these devices, especially on the public groups, would be able to monitor all of your radio traffic in a public group by just determining which hop set selection you were using and which particular public group you were using by observing your operation long enough. But running a private group and running, you know, one of those 10 different hop sets, if you did that and changed your hop set on a daily basis, these things would be pretty doggone secure. And it's because it's so obscure. I mean, there's no way anyone without benefit of a spectrum analyzer and actually observing you utilizing a device like this is going to be able to ascertain what kind of talk path you're using to facilitate communication, so they could work on compromising that. Overall, I think these devices are a big win. Anytime you can get something license-free that offers these kind of performance parameters is definitely worth consideration. I hope this helps. This is Brett from SurvivalComms. Till next time.